We're going to tie a feather micro game changer. We begin with a wiggle tail shank, and the thread is 17-aught uni, which only comes in white. We just tie in at the beginning. We use this shank to mount the tail feathers. Tail feathers come from the same hen cape, Brahma hen cape, as the rest of the feathers. They're about medium size. I've left about, I've wrapped in about 1/8 of an inch left on the back side. This is one feather, and we'll put another feather on the other side. And I just need that to mount the feathers as well as a little bit of fuzz. That'll be my first dubbing loop or dubbing brush. Just tie it in, trim. You can see I've got all my feathers already laid out and matched up and ready to go in the top right hand corner, and it's just a matter of mounting them. I do a little bit of prep, just push the tips back so that I can bring them in, tie them in, and I do 2 at a time. So I'm just preening the top tip of it and then tie in with that last little bit. Take my hackle pliers and see I've got the 2 stems, and I've got the concave side pushing towards the shank itself. And I just preen the feathers back and wrap in concentric wraps. I'm going to take another pair of feathers. I just whip finish it here. Another pair of feathers. Preen back the tips. Tie it in by the tips. And use my hackle pliers. Now, how dense you make that brush is up to you. I like it pretty dense, and so I've got 4 feathers there. You probably could get away with just 2 or 3. And I like to do it by pair, so why not do 4? Preen back. A lot of this fly is just it's just time consuming because the amount of feathers you've got to drop down. It's not hard. None of the skills are hard. It's just time consuming. So when you lose one of these babies, you really get pissed, man. If it's within reach, you're going to go try to get that fly because you do put a lot of time into this fly, and you don't want to lose it. Once again, whip finish. I do 2 sets of 3, and I learned that a long time ago from a buddy. He taught me how to tie some flies, and I like that 2 sets of 3. He also is a manager on a major fly company, and that's what he teaches his tires. So I've got a double whip finish on there. I'm going to just use just a spot of super glue, and all it does, this thing is able to put out just a minute amount, And I can tell it's done it because it darkens up the thread a bit. So I always know that there's a chance of super glue got in the eye. And also to clear the eye, I'm going to heat up my bodkin. The bodkin I'm using is a pin vise holder. And the needle itself is from a blowgun. And I like it because they're sharp, and I like a sharp bodkin, and I just have to switch it out. Just makes it really easy. All right, I'm grabbing my first real shank, and this is a 6mm micro game shank. And drop it in. Now, please pay attention to how I mount this triangle side of this shank. I'm get that one side of the triangle, and I'm leaving that point out quite a bit. And I'm going to cover all of that. And I'm, in fact, go up that triangle with some of those thread wraps. And the reason that is because I want to cover that joint as much as I possibly can. It's kind of hard to do that at this first level because the feathers are not very long. But I've never had a problem with it messing up that joint or following that joint. I just take my feathers and tie it back in there as far as I possibly can. Now I've got her, once again, grabbed a couple of pair of feathers, match the tips, preen the tips back, and tie it in. I should probably trim those off, but I don't. Just lazy. And match up the ends of the stem and use my hackle pliers. Once again, the concave side of the feathers is facing the shank. And preen those feathers back. Now I'm using the Badger because I like that dark middle. It just, I have this in my tank, in my fly test tank, and it's just gorgeous in the water. Trim off the excess stem. Lock it down. And get a couple more feathers. What's nice also, since you're doing it on the cape, the graduation on the top size of the feathers gets larger as you start from the neck portion and go up or down as it will. They just get larger automatically, so it's pretty easy. No guessing if it's larger or smaller, you can tell. Once again, tie my feathers, lock them down. Get my hackle pliers and make concentric wraps. If I might, yeah, you're going to have your buddies asking you when you catch fish with this sucker for some of these flies. Man, this is one fly I do not like handing out because it's just so much darn work. It's not hard to tie. It's just it just work. It's what it is. So I might give you one or two, maybe even three, but after that, you need to go do it yourself. And that's half the reason for creating this video. Wrap concentric wraps, tie it off. Now you can see, you'll see even further, I'll crowd the eye. And it's just so that I can, well, first off, I'm terrible that way, but I want it to cover that joint as much as possible, that hinge. Trim those stems, whip finish. And then hit it again with the glue. What's nice about this glue bottle and the tip is a 27 gauge needle, it does not clog. And if it does clog just a little bit, I just get a little puddle of acetone, swish it around there, and it clears right up. Take my bodkin, burn out the excess. Well, I didn't even bother with that one. I can tell that when I burned the excess off, it was good to go. Now this is, once again, another 6mm shank, micro shank. Once again, note how I mount the shank and how much of that triangle, where I'm putting it. It's just one of the vertices, and leaving that as exposed as I possibly can. And then climbing that thread back up that triangle ramp. Grab a pair of feathers, preen the tips back. I'll grab the tips and preen the rest of the feather back. When I first started doing these, I was just using India henbacks. And to tell you the truth, they work really well, and they're cheap. And they're half the price of these Brahma hen capes. But I just like the look on these hen capes. And you can get them in so many colors. Now here I'm just using one color. This is the cream badger. Man, nothing to stop you. You're putting a lot of feathers down. Nothing to stop you to do combinations. This is just a really pretty bait fish pattern though. And then also mixing some synthetics in it to get a little bit of shine. But for our purposes, I just went with the feathers to show you this process. We finish. Pair of feathers. Grab it by the tips, preen them back. You can do it by hand, but I like using a tool. It just goes faster. I get a cleaner separation. Yeah, you do get to practice your whip finishing skills. Match up the butt ends. I have had, these are the CNF hackle pliers, and these suckers work. For this purpose, it really does work really well. Preen everything back as best I can. Trim off the excess butt end. Wow, didn't even bother gluing that, huh? I just felt that it didn't need it. Now I had a little bit, I wanted a little bit more fullness here, so I added some more feathers. And as you can tell, as the feathers get larger and larger, of course the stems get larger and there's less room, but it's just a matter of preening those feathers back. Trim some of the excess feather. Hit it again with the glue. And then burn out the excess once again. Now that's just a magnetic push pin. That's my pawn, tying pawn. I'm fortunate that they had hit on the my Renzetti's magnetic. Darn things cost like $5 or $5. All right, so once I've now upsized the shank. This is a 8mm micro game shank. So it's just a little bit longer, a third more longer. A third longer. Mount my thread. Close that pin. Put my thread back into that triangle, deep into that triangle as I possibly can. Now here I get a little bit, appreciably much larger feathers. I like it to get some real body, a little bit more body in this portion of it. And I'll also increase the density, meaning I'll use more feathers. Once again, concentric wraps. The concave portion of the feather facing the shank. And tie off the feathers. Match up the butt ends and wrap again. See how big those feathers are getting now? And then also, and correspondingly, the stems are larger, thicker. But you get that nice shape automatically, that triangle shape, that long, deep triangle. Versus on a synthetic, you have to trim it out. That's why I like the feathers. You know, there's trade-offs. The synthetics work just as well as the feathers. And you can buy the brushes, so it makes it easier to tie the fly. But I like the movement of the feather game changer. Now I just preen everything back, wrap it down, whip finish, and then hit it with some glue. I'll trim first. See how you can tell it's just a minute drop. It changes the color of the thread. That's all you need. Heat up my bodkin, burn out the excess feathers and the glue. That white smoke's actually the glue. It's minute amount of glue that I put there. It's still there, so that burning off really helps it. Now, I'm cutting off that back end stem of that wiggle shank. I don't need it, so I've trimmed it off. And now I'm going to mount a Kona Big Game Hunter. And this is the number 6. You could also use a Gamakatsu SC15. I just love this hook though. Very stout, just perfect proportions. And for making a really good head, a dense head for this fly so that it swims properly. And to be honest with you, man, I like this hook because how wide the gape is and how thick it is. The jaw on a largemouth and a smallie is, wow, it's just thick. And so you really got to drive that hook into that jaw. And so that gape overcomes the thickness of the jawbone, and so it curls around it and hooks it really well. Now, these are just a pair of large bead chain eyes that I use as eyes. Actually, the bead chain I got from a lamp pull cord from the hardware store. I'm just figure eighting it out. Lock it in. Now, note the amount of room that I live. That's at least an eye and a half, if not 2 eyes, from space behind the eye of the hook. Now I'm going to use some I actually use 3x fluorocarbon tippet material as a hinge. So I've taken the thread back into about just above the barb. I'm flattening out the tip portion of that hinge or that tippet material. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a flat spot, see how that flat spot? And behind, right at my fingertips, you'll see another flat spot. I'm going to match those 2 flat spots, so it's a flat to flat, and I get it closes better, and it actually creates a loop, and that's where I'm going to hang the abdomen section of this fly. That flat to flat is on purpose versus round to round. It just sets in there better. Now, I don't use metal or heavier gauge metal because I don't need it. There's no pressure on that abdomen section. It just needs to wiggle. So I don't have to use any kind of metal or cable. Now I've hooped it up around the eyes and then back over again, because I still don't want to lose that abdomen. Trim it out. And once again, even on this hinge, I let my feathers go over the top of that joint and still do not have problems with it fouling. Now I'm going to use some much larger feathers from my hen cape, because I need to increase the density and the width of the fly so that when it goes through the water, it creates a dead spot behind the head of the fly, and then allowing the back section to wiggle. That's my game. So I'm going to pack a lot of large feathers that the breadth of them are pretty wide, and that's to create that dead space. First pair of feathers, it's again in by the tips. Get that bobbin out of the way. Unwrap with concentric wraps and preen those feathers back, those tips back. Trim the butt sections and tie it off. Once again, match up a pair, match up the tips, tie them in. And wrap again. Now, the question is asked, is it worth it? I go, yeah, it is. You should see the bass go after this stupid fly. I've got a fly that works really well and has for years and years, for the last 15 years for me. This I came up with, when I saw this, I needed the time of the year after the spawn and after they've rested, those smallies go deep, and I'm talking 15 feet, and they just suspend. And it takes a lot to entice them to hit something. This thing does it. For some reason, when you drop this sucker in there, and you just strip a little bit, and then the way that when you stop stripping, it sinks horizontally. It doesn't dive, it sinks horizontally. Just that subtle movement, that can set them off. You got to get it in front of their face, but that's why I'm doing these. I know it's a lot of work, but it solves that problem. Not that it doesn't work the rest of the year, but for that specific problem, this is a good solution. Once again, another pair of feathers. Preen the tips, tie them in. I just love these Brahma hand cape badger, cream badger. I like them also in the olive, the dark olive. Yeah, all the colors they got. It's gorgeous stuff. And it's even better in the water. Now you can see how dense that head is. It's just packed in there. Between the back end of the fly and those eyes, you can pack a lot of feathers and create that density that you need in order to create that head, so that it creates that dead spot behind it. I broke my thread. No biggie, just grab another spool. I should note the reason I broke that thread, I nicked the tip of the hook. And that's how I cut that thread. So you got to watch out. Now I'm pushing everything back that I possibly can. I'm going to whip finish. And drop a bit of glue in there. I like the glue method because it just drops enough glue. Because you know as well as I do, if you've ever dropped glue CA in there, man, it just, if you put, even when you don't put too much, it still wicks up. So you got over an excess amount of glue in there using another application method. The other better way to do it is to have a little pool of super glue sitting on your desk, and then you put your bodkin in it, and then you grab a drop. Well, this method is half or a third of a drop, which is all you really need. Now this is my last batch of feathers that I'll actually bring to the front. So I've tied it in. I'm going to trim off some of the excess tips. I need that extra glue. I know I've got all those feathers in there and it'll soak through. But it won't hurt anything. Bring my thread up through the eye so that I can wrap. Now I'll make one complete wrap behind the eyes and then I bring it up to the front. Right between the eyes. And just wrap in the front and preen back as I go. I want to encourage you to use and try different kinds of feathers. I've used India henback. This is a Brahma henback. Any soft hackle feathers. It's countless, and the amount of colors. And then I've combined different kinds of feathers too, just to see what I'm getting for an effect. Or synthetics, like I'll put red synthetic chenille, so it looks like gills. Or I'll add a different color feather to make it look like more like a sculpin, and I'll have those feathers more pronounced, so it looks like it's outrigger feathers. Now I've preened everything back. I'm trimming off the stems. I'm going to whip finish. Basically, the fly is tied now. And trim back some of that extra material. That's a good drop, top and bottom. Now, I'm going to take some UV resin in the thin, and I'm going to preen back those front feathers, and then I'm going to put a spot of UV resin in the front, just underneath it. Don't let it go too far back, just in the front. You can tell how far I went back. Let it soak in, and I'm going to hit it with my torch. And see, I set the eyes off, get everything moving in the back to the right angle, and brush it out. I'm clearing some of the feathers underneath to clear the hook. I haven't had problems with it fouling and not hooking up, but I just like it. Give it more of a chance to really get a good hook set. Preen back. Get a chance to try this baby out and then experiment with the different kinds of feathers. And that's my feather micro game changer.